Hi, I'm Rod Trott. Welcome to Off the Cuff. Today we have the pleasure of talking with Steve Roberts, a man I describe as an extraordinary artist, as do many others. Over the past 60 to 70 years, Steve has created an enormous range of well-designed, beautiful, unique motorcycles and motor cars. And over this series, we're going to investigate his work and bring that to you. The story begins in 1964 at a time when there was a rise in motocross in New Zealand and the birth of the Spartan. Steve, the Spartan. So how did that start and how did it go in terms of a process? Whose idea was it and where did it begin and where did it go?
Well, the beginning of it was coming to New Zealand, really, and landing on the Wellington docks in the Brittany boat, Brittany, the Greek Chandris line. First thing I wanted to do was buy a bike, motorbike, and I went to a firm called Tolley and Spence, and I said, what have you got that we can use to get to work and back? And he gave me the price of the bikes. And coming from Britain, where the bikes were pretty reasonable, it was like, I couldn't believe the cost. It took me back. I thought, God. So the next thing was, if I want to do motorcycling, I'm going to have to build it myself. And that's how it started. Okay. I made a little model of a frame, and we can do this. And we built the first motocross bike in 1964, which goes back a few years.
Yep.
It might have been 63 when we started and finished it in 64.
Yeah.
And so that's how it started.
So in terms of building your own bike,
yes,
and the design, so what was the thinking process that went into that actual construction of that bike?
The thing is that they were building the bikes, hand building these bikes in Britain. And I thought, well, if they can do it, so can we. That's literally it. And I studied several of the bikes, which the Matisse was #1, which is the #1 bike in Europe at the time. I thought, right, we'll copy that as close as we can, which is what we did.
Yeah.
And it was really a situation, machining the head stem for forks to go in, getting that sorted. That was a bit difficult to start with, but we got that sorted. And then bending the tubes was the second problem.
Okay.
And
can I come in here? Because
yes,
we better tell people viewing this what we've got here. Just quickly.
This is a 1967 Spartan. This would be what we would call the Mark IV, because we changed the frame layout a little bit to make it a bit so we can have a very skinny tank on. Because in the early model, I used to have a tank which was a bit bigger, and the knee recess was about here. Yes. And after a motocross, my knees would be absolutely blue with banging into this. So we made this Mark IV with a very skinny tank, and it all worked out pretty well. So that's what that is. And we used engines from wrecked motorcycles.
Yeah.
We used Jap, we used Triumph, we used AJS, Matchless. We had quite a few different motors in them, and that was really what they were. And we called them a Spartan because they're Triumph Spartan or a BSA Spartan, because BSA was the main bit and the rest of it was quite, Spartan.
So that's your name for it.
It was yes. I thought we've got to have. Matisse meant something about a mongrel dog in French, and I thought, well, Spartan is a Triumph is the main bit, and the rest of it's quite Spartan. And that's how it ended up with the name.
Yeah.
But That was about it, Rod.
So what, you built the first one and you rode it?
The first one we built, we had to work out how to, A, make the head stem, which we've sorted that out, and then B, we had to work out how to bend the tubes. And what we used to do in the aircraft industry where I apprenticed, we used to fill the copper tubes up for coppersmithing work with a rosin. It was a type of resin that you melt and pour into the tube, and it solidifies, and then you can pull them round. And a good friend of mine at that time in Wellington got his dad to help make a former for the bend, which is, this bend here is quite a tricky one, that one. We made up a former for that, and we literally put the tubes in and pulled them round. Nothing, no fancy stuff at all. Pulled them round like this. It was great. And it worked. Didn't collapse or anything.
So the prototype you built for yourself and you rode it yourself.
Yes.
And then did you get other people coming to you saying, hey, I want one of...
Yes, I did. I was building mine, and someone came, well, all my customers were friends in the end, and it was great. But in the end, building number one, he came along and said, oh, I want one of those. And I hadn't even ridden it. We built number two at the same time. And it was a race between he and me, Dennis Thetford and me, who would get the bike on the track first. And he beat me. He got it on the track before I did. But that was pretty good. So the first two bikes were actually just about the same in 1964, late 64.
Right. So after the first two were built...
the first two, the thing was in that time, in the 60s, you could get very little for motocross. There were very little bikes around here. You couldn't import bikes, that's number one.
Right.
And so there was an interest there. And then a good friend, Dave Bridge, came along and said, can you make me one for mine? I've got a Gold Star, but it's too heavy. And we built a frame for him. And it slowly but surely, one or two people came along. And in the end, we were going pretty well. I was able to build them quite quickly, learning for the frames not to, we didn't want them to break. So we made them quite heavy. I remember some competitor once telling me, those bikes are so blimmin' heavy, you could put a bulldozer blade on the front of them and they'd be okay. I was so cheesed off. I thought, God, I'm doing everything I can to get it light, and here's this guy. Anyway, and they worked, and we ended up, as I say, putting quite a lot of different motors in them, different frames, different motors.
And then some of the top riders, the Collinsons and
the Allen.
those guys started riding. So what was that? How did that work through with that part of the story?
Well, it's an interesting time. The Alan Collison was a real rider, and he had a young apprentice, Morley Sheriffs, who was a very good rider. And Alan said, can you build us up a bike? We've got a load of bits here, put it into a bike, and we'll give it for Morley to ride, the apprentice to ride. Well, we finished it, and in the first race out, Morley was riding the Spartan with a Triumph motor, Triumph gearbox, and Alan was riding his beautiful Matisse, which is the top of the line bike.
Imported from...
Top of the line rider. And Morley beat him in the race, which was quite... Alan told me this. I didn't know about this, but he told me this about a couple of years back. And he said, you wouldn't believe it, Morley beat me. So we swapped bikes at the next race. And I was on the Spartan, he rode the Spartan, and Morley rode the Matisse. And Alan beat Morley. And I always remember that, him telling me that, and thinking, gee, well, I never knew that. And it was 20 years later, 30 years later more, that he told me about it. And it was a bit were pretty good.
And these guys, Morley Sheriffs and Alan Collinson, and they were the top in the country.
Oh yes,
In those times.
But there were, by that time, we were getting towards the 70s, and all things were happening in the motorcycle world.
Yes.
And the BSAs were coming in to the country. They were getting other bikes in.
Yes.
So we were getting long in the tooth.
Yeah.
We were getting a bit obsolete with the big 4-strokes.
Yes. Yeah.
And so a good friend of mine, Luke Taylor, said, make me a 2-stroke, make me a Husqvarna special, which is what we did. And Luke sponsored it. We had a nice 250 motor. We put a Spartan frame around it, and it was a little beauty. I rode it for the first season, and then Luke took it to England and raced it in England, and did very well on it over there. And since that time, he's been looking for it. He sold it to start a business up over there, and he's been, will you make me another bike? Will you make me a replica? And I said yes. I finally said yes. This year, or last year.
Yes.
I bought the tube for it, got the benders out, everything like this, and then I managed to have a stroke, which, wouldn't believe it. I was really looking forward to that, and I've ended up not being able to make it.
Yeah.
But never mind.
Yeah.
That's
How's recovery going?
Oh, it's getting. Oh, we're definitely getting better.
Yeah.
Definitely fine.
Good.
Wanganui Hospital, 10 out of 10.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Great.
But with Luke's bike, we the last race of the season that I had the bike was Woodville Motocross.
Right.
Tim Gibbs' organisation.
The big one.
Brilliant. And we had Gunnar Lindstrom, who was a works mechanic and rider for Husqvarna, was invited over to New Zealand to race the series with Tim and his people. And he said to Tim, wouldn't mind riding that Spartan of Steve Roberts's. And Tim said, "Yeah, well, all right. You can, if you go, you can go out, but you have to start way back at the last of the field, and see how you get. Have a test run." Now, Ivan Miller, who was a #1 rider in the 250 class, had won every race in the season.
Yeah, I remember that.
And this was the last race of the season. And Gunnar jumped on the bike, never ridden it before, and he went right through the field. And unfortunately for Ivan, he pipped him on the last lap and got the win. Sorry, Ivan. Sorry, Ivan.
Yeah.
But
Sorry, Ivan.
it really worked.
Yeah,
So I was quite happy about it. Oh, Gunnar, what a super guy, super rider.
Yeah.
And he was most complimentary,
Yeah.
which is super.
Yeah. Nice.
So we ended up with a 2-stroke. We ended up with 2-stroke in the end.
Yeah.
But then things were changing in the motocross world,
Yes.
and it became uncompetitive to build them nowadays, for me anyway.
Yes. And during that time, there was some involvement around Suzuki engines and
Oh, yes, as a matter of fact, it was.
What was that?
Well, what happened was, this is where the Rod Coleman connection comes in.
Yes.
And this is where we first started dealing with Rod.
Right.
Where he, how can I say, he had organised for Ivan Miller to come back from England, from Europe, to ride a works bike.
Right.
And unfortunately, the works bike didn't arrive. In fact, Rod couldn't get it in. But Suzuki sent him the drawings of the modified frames. And I thought, gee, this is good. I've got a chance to be still involved with such riders as Ivan. Yeah. So we built this modified swinging arm and the modified rear end to the factory drawings. And I took it out for a test run on my test track in Ohario Valley, Wellington.
Yeah.
And there was one hill which I had, which I could lift the front wheel off my Spartan and I could come down on my back wheel with a bit of luck. I took the Suzuki out. I got to this massive hill, and believe it, I couldn't believe it. I was the second lap. I was jumping off this hill and jumping it off. I couldn't believe it. And when we took the bike, got it back in the shed and measured it all up and make sure everything was under control, it was all working well, I realised I had nearly 13 inches of travel on the back wheel. I had about that much travel on the back wheel. I thought, the chain will never last, but it did last. And Ivan went on to win the series. And his teammate, we also built a modified Suzuki for Peter Plowen. He got a good run as well. So that was the Suzuki.
So looking back on that first foray into your career of building works of art.
That's right.
Hello.
Well, they are.
We will show a finished
You do your
one.
best. You do your best to get the lines right. Like with the tank coming down and the sweep of the seat and everything. You do your best. And I find if you can have the frame like this and you can make the exhaust pipe carry on the same lines, it can make quite a difference to a bike. If it looks right, it generally is right. If it looks right.
So that process of getting those lines and form right, it's coming out of here?
Oh gosh, yes.
And that's it? That's it?
That's it.
That's it.
It's got to look right. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking back on the Spartan experience, kicking off your incredible career of doing what you've done, what are the highlights that stand out in terms of enjoyment for you?
Well, the enjoyment of it all was the whole thing was the motorcycle crowd, the motorcycle competitors and the followers. It was such being Pom coming over here and being accepted by such a great crowd of guys was pretty damn good for me. We did the tour around the North Island with Tim's series, Motocross series, and then we went down south. What a buzz. I had a Ford Thames van, which was all the rage in those days, and Pam and my two children, Ralph and Mandy. Mandy was about nearly one. I think Ralph was 3. And the Spartan and the beds. We all crammed into this little Ford Thames van, and we went right around the South Island, seeing all the Otago, seeing all this Timaru, all those beautiful places. It was fabulous. Night time, we had to take the bike out, unload get the bed sorted for the children. It was brilliant. Mandy had, my daughter, we had to do quite a lot of washing, young children. And I remember Pam, she'd come up with this brilliant idea, where she'd wash the nappies, because we didn't have disposable things in those days, and she would have them on a string, and she'd hang them out the window as we were driving. And she was drying the nappies out. It was wonderful. I remember JN was on the start line at New Plymouth. And Hugh Anderson was there. It was quite a terrific field of riders. I remember he was on the I was behind him because I also ran. I only won one race in the whole of my 7 years of motocrossing. I won one race. I can tell you about that if you like. And my chain was on the line, it was all ready to go, and he banged the clutch in, but the motor was running backwards. Backwards? Yes. I think he had Husqvarna, but and
he went backwards.
He went backwards quickly to stop it, but I was behind him, so I could see it all happening in front of me. Very funny. And we were just talking about JN.
He was a star.
He was the terrific rider.
Terrific rider.
But that's what the motocross was for me. All those wonderful characters. I could go on forever about Bill Pink, the drummer. Alan,
Yeah.
Ken Cleghorn, wow, Ken, what a character he was.
Yeah. And the race you won.
The race I won was at Bryant's Farm in Ohio Valley.
Yeah.
So my home track.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I marked the course out.
Yep.
And I was the organizer. Don't ask me how I ended up with it, but I did. And I was practicing. And Alan Collison came past, and he came past me, looked at me, and pointed at his back wheel, and to say, "Follow me," which was great. So I followed him, and I just followed him exactly where he went.
Yes.
They're completely different lines to what I was taking.
Yes.
And in my race, the B grade race, but still the first race, I did exactly what he said, and I got a win.
Learning from the master.
Well, I was behind. I remembered what he said.
Yeah.
Terrific. Yeah. But then in the experts race on the same day, I was going in the experts race. Of course, I was way back, and I remember someone running alongside me, going up into the hairpin, saying, "Come on, Grandad!" And I couldn't believe it. I thought, oh well, there you go.
Wow, it's being
Come on, Grandad.
brought down to earth.
It was very, very funny. And I was tutoring at the time. I'd go to work on the Monday morning, and they'd say, "How was the motocross, Mr. Roberts?" And of course, I'd be so bloody sore.
Yeah.
And it was all right. "Did you fall off, Mr. Roberts?" It was very, very funny. I said, "By Wednesday, we'll be all right."
Yeah. So, Steve, all of this is taking place when based in Wellington, and
Yes, yeah.
and including the Stutz
Yes.
rebuild.
Yeah.
And then you moved to Wanganui, didn't you?
That's
after,
right.
After that.
Yes.
And what caused that move out of Wellington to here in
Well,
Wanganui?
I'd been with the Polytechnic for 13, 14 years.
Yes.
Anyway, Rod Coleman offered a job here to build Suzuki Jeeps, canopies for Suzuki Jeeps,
Right.
which is what we did.
Right. So that's what brought.
Well, I
you
was
and your
building them
family.
back in Wellington,
Yeah.
in my shed,
Yeah.
and for a year I was building those for a year.
Yeah.
And in the end, we just came up here and started a factory and started building them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the once you were here, the rest of your work, which we'll talk about later, was in this shed here.
In this shed, oh yes.
Yeah.
This has
So
been this is just. I'll tell you what. If you're interested in your work, it isn't work. That's the first thing. And when you meet such people as Lynn Southwards, the Rod Coleman, you name it. I've met so many interesting people in what I do here. All these riders from the Spartans.
Yes.
Are they still in touch?
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Steve, the question of numbers of Spartan, I'm interested in it because it seems to me that you have been incredibly productive over 50 to 60 years. So you mentioned you thought that we talked 10 or 12 or 14. If I said to you it was in fact 23, would you be surprised?
No, it wasn't 23. I've been trying to think of it since we spoke last about it, and I think it could be 12, 13, 14 in that era. I can't think of any more than that.
Why we say that is in the research material you gave to us, there was a list with the names of Spartan owners on it.
Oh yes.
And then at the bottom there was plus 5 mine. That's how we got to 23.
Oh right. Well, I can't believe. We could be well. I haven't really read that scrapbook for a few years.
So perhaps
I can't imagine it being 20. Can't imagine it. But still, I can probably name 12 riders that I remember
Yeah.
dealing with.
Yeah.
The Spartan, the purpose-built motocross bike developed right here in New Zealand. One of the few remaining complete Spartans built by Steve. Now fully restored by Steve Gallichan with help from Steve Roberts, proudly on display in his collection in Taranaki. Steve Gallichan tells us this 1965 Spartan was a bike he had always wanted in his collection, and that working with Steve Roberts was a truly creative process. Next episode, we're going to be talking to Steve about other exciting projects. We'll see you then.